Hi everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Reframe series, where we are unpacking what it means to be Desi locally and globally. Please like and subscribe so we can continue to bring you more content. And today we have a very special guest with us, Dr. Laxmi Ramasubramanian, and she is an Interim Associate Dean for Research for the College of Social Sciences and Professor of Urban Planning at San Jose State University. Her research focuses on how to improve the quality of public engagement around complex urban problems and how to innovatively use local indigenous community knowledge to inform planning and policymaking. It's very nice to have you on today. I'd love to get us started by asking you what inspired you to go into the field of urban planning, and especially in this academic context that we're in.
Thank you so much for having me. I am originally from southern India. I was raised in the city of Madras, now Chennai, and I, at an early age, was interested in space, physical space, mostly because people who don't have space think a lot about space. Right. So it's like, in India and southern India and where I grew up is pretty dense and crowded. And I was always thinking about space. So I got into the field of architecture, the first person in my family to think about architecture. And I had no clue, I just knew it was a subject that would help me think about space. Right, and plan. And so I got into architecture, and by fourth year, I realized, all they're teaching me is to build houses for rich people. And I know that's not quite it. They taught more, but that's how it felt to me as a young person, and it didn't resonate with my emerging sense of equity and justice. And I looked around and I tried to figure out what was the field that was trying to solve problems at the city scale. So still spatial problems, but solving them not at the scale of a house or an office building or a apartment complex, but really thinking about solving problems for the city as a whole. And I thought, there's something called planning, and that's brought me into planning. So then I got into planning, and then I learned more about, the production of housing, for example, and the theories of, empowerment and marginalization. And it opened my eyes a little more than what architecture was able to do for a young person like myself. It's not about the field, it's about me. And then I came to this country because one of my mentors or teachers in India said, you seem to be really interested in sort of thinking about things. And so perhaps you should go get a master's in, abroad. And so I said, okay. And I applied to a couple of places, and I did them with no context, because most kids don't have the context, right? So you just like looking, and that was before websites. So looking at brochures and things like that. And so I chose to go to MIT, Massachusetts Institute of Technology, and I applied and got the letters of reference and submitted my portfolio, which was all hand done and, very different from what you would do today. And I was surprised that I was accepted, and even more surprised that I got a little bit of funding. And so I showed up to this country from my mother's house, as I say, to MIT, which was pretty scary. And so then I ended up here and then struggled a little bit. And then at some stage decided that if I want to have impact, then I needed to get a PhD. And so then, then I went out to get a PhD, and then I got a PhD, and I said, I have things I can tell other people. So there again, it's like this transferring of knowledge, right? So that's kind of like my quick trajectory of how I ended up.
Yeah, there's so many different pieces in all of those different parts of your story. I'd love to know, what kind of challenges did you face along your journey in each of these areas? Because even during that time, I can imagine coming to the U.S. And kind of establishing yourself. That's a significant challenge in and of itself. Even doing urban planning or architecture within an Indian context and getting into Indian schools is quite a feat. And then settling in a new area and also practicing as an urban planner and getting a PhD. It sounds like you had a lot of things that you had to work through in your journey.
Absolutely. I think in India, gender discrimination is alive and well, right? It was alive and well, and unfortunately, it's still alive and well. And so part of the challenge of trying to go into architecture school even is to try to explain as a 17-year-old to some adult, why do you want to go to get a degree, not even graduate school? Why do you want to get an undergraduate professional degree in architecture? You're taking the spot of a man. And just having to navigate that and to say, well, I deserve to be in this place, and I'm going to be here, even if you don't want me here. I think that has been a part of my life. Right. And it's probably a part of every woman of color, right, in that struggle. And so, it's quite interesting because I think you find pockets of allyship and support, and they are in unexpected corners. So as a young person in India, I found my teachers were supportive in many cases. I know it was very paternalistic in some ways because they would say, I have daughters, so I'm really concerned about your well-being because I'm thinking about, and I'm like, okay, that's great. But I took that help. There were detractors, but you learn to brush it off. And then coming to this country, it was really interesting because I went from being kind of at the top of my class to kind of like not at the top of my class because I suddenly realized, oh my God, I'm in this big world where there's all these talented people and it's very different, right? And so then finding allyship and support with peers and learning to be vulnerable and exposing oneself to new knowledges. And I have been so blessed because the people, when I arrived in Boston and Cambridge, the student community that supported me, the faculty community that supported me was really helpful because I had no one, right? And so I am very aware of that. So now I think as an adult and somebody with a position of power, I'm very aware of what our international students need, because they are really quite vulnerable when they come for the first time. And so the challenges have to do with fitting in, but also like confronting these questions. Like, so in India, it was like, oh, you're taking the place of a guy. And here it was like, well, you're an outsider and you're taking our jobs away because why don't you go back to where you came from, right? Some version of that. And trying to explain and justify that I'm not taking away, I'm adding and I'm giving, and maybe you need me, and sort of making that argument gently has been a kind of persistent theme, right? And so discovery of academia and academic context doesn't make structural racism go away. I think that the racism exists in the academy as much as anything else, even if there are enlightened people, right? The system is set up in a way to punish and marginalize people of color, immigrants, anybody who is different from the norm, whatever that norm is. Heavy, huh?
It is, but I think there's a lot of honesty in it too. And it's always challenging when, like, for me personally, as like a data analyst who's always doing research around like racial and gender equity, and looking at these differences and understanding that there's a whole host of issues behind them, right? There's so many different stories and experiences that are accumulating to create these differences in the living conditions, the education levels, just the quality of life for everyone, both in the U.S. and California, within different cities and regions. And I think you shed a lot of that light, which is, I think, very true, that we can know that all of these issues are existing, but it's different when you're actually trying to be part of the solution and solve them, and to recognize that there are so many different pieces to all of this.
Yeah.
And it seems like you have in your own life overcome so many challenges, from having to justify even being able to go to school to then being admitted to one of the top universities in the nation, and flourishing, and now helping to support and pave the way for other students to be able to also grow and get their own education, and especially around the field of urban planning.
Right. And so I think that for me, coming to MIT and going to classes and just, it's like, often the analogy that they use in the university is like drinking out of a fire hose, right? That's the analogy that's used. And so indeed, there's a lot of information, but I also learned from, the community-oriented work that I was fortunate to do while I was a student. And I would encourage any student or any young person to seek out those opportunities outside of the academic environment, and to actually be in the community and do volunteer work or, work in a way that connects to the lived experience of the people you want to serve ultimately, right? And rather than seeing it as a sort of, I'm going to produce some knowledge and then deliver that knowledge to somebody to use. It's like what I learned at a very early age is in my career development is that co-creating knowledge is far more rewarding. And especially when we think about sustainability of ideas, when we think about sustainability of whatever we're trying to do to make sure that it continues, right? You need to co-create that knowledge and then make sure that it's not a one-size-fits-all approach. It has to be relevant to that particular community. So I'm circling back to thinking about space and place. I don't think urban planning can be a sort of, we've done this in California or in San Jose, so now we're going to replicate this in another place, right? And so the identity and the authenticity of San Jose has to to be reflected in the work that we do, the people that we serve. And there are some common themes and similarities, but I think that we cannot do this cookie cutter approach to planning. And the only way you can do that is you work in partnership with the local folks who are there. And so I've been talking a lot about using GIS, and I'm glad you said that you're a data analyst. I was really excited about GIS, but for me, GIS is much more than a data analysis medium. It's more of a communicative tool. It's a way to engage people and draw people into the conversation, to facilitate counter mapping, to facilitate digital storytelling, to explore data in different ways, like to ask questions that haven't been asked before, and then to say, oh, I guess the GIS can't answer that, because GIS is often very much a rational, technical way of seeing the world. And for me, I'd like to marry GIS with sort of community organizing, and so where they can work in partnership to create a transformative place, and improve the quality of life for everyone.
Yeah, I think that's so intriguing to hear. I'd love to know more about that. I think even in our work, we do a lot of work in partnership with community, and I think that GIS has been a really powerful tool for us in kind of creating that engagement, but also being able to tell powerful stories. Because I think sometimes being able to see on a map really hits home kind of what is happening, or what disparities might be looking like in the context of a city. In this, like, if it was Los Angeles or San Jose, mm-hmm. or San Francisco.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I'd love to also ask, are there key lessons that you've taken away from your experiences, and that you feel like might be helpful to other folks on their journey?
I think that the key lesson I have is a couple of lessons. One is that to be hopeful. And it's hard sometimes to keep that hope going, right? And to stay positive and to think about the possibilities rather than all the barriers that we're experiencing. And so that takes work in some ways, to reframe, to stay positive, but that's so important, because otherwise, especially as an immigrant in a different place, you can really sort of fall apart in ways that are visible and sometimes invisible, right? And it can create mental health challenges, and really, so that I think to work on keeping that hope and the possibilities alive. And in order to do that, you need to do it in community.
Mm.
You can't do it alone. You can't keep hope alive by yourself. I mean, it's hard. So you would have to do it in community, in solidarity, which means building bridges and stepping outside of, I'm South Asian, Tamilian, all of that, to, what are the connections that I can build with people around the world, and to look for our common humanity rather than sort of the divisions. And I think that stood me in good stead. And it's also like, I don't know that it's a big lesson, but it's what's worked for me. Yeah.
Yeah. Are there ways that you found to stay connected with your community, or to kind of help to build that sort of network for yourself?
I think just curiosity, just going out and talking to people and saying, sort of not waiting for friendships to come to you, but to be the person to go out and seek out those connections. And of course, I mean, there's risks involved because you might be rebuffed in those reach outs. But I think that's almost essential. You can't wait for to be invited to the party. You have to invite yourself.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And yeah, it makes sense that, especially as someone who's coming in as an outsider, that needing to kind of develop those communication skills and to build trust and develop relationships with folks that are in your surrounding community. It's really valuable and important, because we can't live on our own and like hope to survive forever. We'll just drown in our own loneliness.
Yeah. So one of the things that I'd like to share is I think I've been very indulgent when people from another culture say stupid things, right? When I first came to this country, it was all about, elephants and snake charmers. We don't have that now, but now it's the modern equivalent, right? India has 1 billion people, but somehow I'm representing all these billion people. And so it's I don't have answers to all your questions because I don't know. I mean, I know my world, but I don't know everything. But I've been very indulgent. I've tried very hard not to scold people when they are asking what feels like inappropriate, uninformed questions. I've just engaged with that. Or when people tell me, oh, you're from Tamil Nadu, curry and rice. And it's just yes, curry and rice, but there's more. And so it's just being a little bit, I find sometimes some of my, Desi Indian friends, they get really annoyed. It's misusing the culture, misappropriating the culture, not giving due homage to the tradition, and being superficial. And I struggle with that too, especially, and we can have a whole separate conversation about that. But in general, I've been very patient and indulgent. I'll engage. People ask me questions, I'll try to explain. And so maybe the next person down the road doesn't have to do that.
Yeah. It's, I definitely understand that experience. I think, so I came to the US when I was 6. My mother had very similar experiences to yours as well, where she was the first woman in her family to go to college. So it was nice connecting in that way. I think when I came here, I didn't really understand in India that well, because I had come and I was just dealing with the challenges of learning English and kind of learning how everything worked. But it was often the case, I think, in growing up, and I think a lot of South Asian youth deal with this when they're in spaces where they are a minority, of having to represent that minority. And it's often, I I definitely can feel the kind of the frustration or the tension that that goes into those situations, because it's almost like a sense of like, am I doing justice to my own culture in describing it this way? And who am I to have the authority to say what the opinion of these billion people on this continent are? And to, I think, slowly, maybe not even understanding that when first arriving, but then like after a while, really getting to have that deeper level of understanding, like, oh, that those moments are like my one opportunity to be able to represent Indian culture. And yeah, it's very challenging.
Indeed, it is, and it's changed, and there's so much progress in terms of how Indians and Indian Americans are influencing change in different spheres of American life, right? From politics to policy, you have representation and visibility, and even though they continue to like not get names and pronounce things and stuff like that, it's a small price to pay, because I think that there's an understanding of the potential of what this community can offer. So I feel hopeful again, and I think that's probably just me, glass half full always. And but in American higher ed, where I am in now, there is so much more to do. Because higher ed is a microcosm of American society. It's not different from, and it's faced with all the challenges of sort of that we experience, like I mentioned before, racism and sexism and so on. And so, particularly in leadership, right? Like, so you have lots of, people going to school, doing PhD, participating. But as you go up the academic ladder, the top echelons of power are still very white and male. And so I think that's the sort of the challenge, like to break that.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think there's a general trend, I think, across many different industries of that being the case, and kind of the challenges that come with that, and how to like tackle that as a woman or a person of color whose experiences are not often shared. There's often no role models. Or really clear pathways of how to gain success in those types of environments.
Mm-hmm. Indeed, yeah.
So, on a day-to-day basis, when you're doing your work, what is that experience like?
Right now, I very recently moved to. 6 months ago, moved to being Interim Associate Dean for Research. Prior to that, I was department chair. And the department chair life is, for 3 or 4 years that I've been doing it, some of it through the pandemic, my day-to-day life has been very much about taking care of people. Right? Taking care of students, taking care of my faculty, taking care of anxious parents, taking care of a variety of stakeholders, and making sure that everyone, sort of acknowledging the burnout and anxiety associated with the pandemic, but also trying to help them emerge and continue and progress along their journeys, right? And so this means holding a lot of people's hopes and fears and energies close by. And that experience, I think, sometimes you do need to pause and take a break because it can get overwhelming. And I'll tell you, there's nothing like going back to India for a couple of weeks to have a break, because it's like, not that it's vacation, but it's just like a whole different set of emotions, sensory overload that comes from being in India, that you kind of like set this aside and you're fully immersed in that environment. So that's my day-to-day life, being much more responsive and concerned about other folks and their well-being. And I do it with joy because I think that's part of being a leader. And right now, in my role as Associate Dean, I'm responsible for interpreting policy and helping fellow leaders, department chairs now, try to do their job better. So it's caretaking, but it's in a more like, how can I streamline procedures so that things are easier for them? How can I interpret the policy so that they can do what they need to do? How can I make visible the good work that my colleagues are doing, and doing it with intentionality? So, so it's like, part of it is like operationalizing equity. It requires a lot of thinking about, like, it's not like, we offer the same thing to everybody, but we have to, like, what can we do to make sure that we highlight the good work of one or two people, and then use that as a teaching moment to connect with a larger group, right? It's and encouraging people. You'll be surprised how many people, it's not just women, but women, like, they just, like, I send out an email, like, here's a grant opportunity to apply to. You'd be surprised. And I have in mind, okay, these people should be applying, but they don't. And so then it's like, you have to send this extra email and say, I sent you this thing, have you considered? Oh yeah, I saw it, but I didn't think I was the right person. Like, why? Why do you think that? And so then it's like, oh, may I encourage you to try it anyway? And so it's like that's what equity is, right? Like, you like pushing people a little bit to nudging them to participate, because they're self-selecting and opting out.
Yeah.
And women, people of color, do that all the time, unfortunately.
Yeah. Wow. I think this was this really was eye-opening for me. I had no idea that, but I think it's often very easy, I think, when you don't see yourself in those types of positions of power, to even think that you belong there. And so that it makes a lot of sense when you share that. Yeah. And that I think that's a really great thing that you point out, the value of the small nudges to encourage growth and leadership in our communities in that way.
Yeah. And now as so in urban planning, our field is quite diverse. It's not so siloed like some other fields. We could do better. But I do a lot of talking to people on the phone and on email and on Zoom, coaching, right? How do you deal with a difficult colleague? How do you deal with asking for a pay raise? How do you deal with going off a promotion to the next career step? I had a woman write to me on Sunday saying, how do I got a really cool job offer and I have it. How do I break the news to my current employer? And I'm like, they have the answer, but they just need somebody to talk it through. And I'm quite happy to do that. It's just like, that's something that I think is necessary, because we don't have the club, right? There's no club to go to work this out. So we're building the club.
Yeah. That's great. This idea of like using that network and developing those relationships of trust to help kind of push you forward. That idea of like you, when I'm hearing you speak, the things that really coming up for me is like that saying of like you can go fast alone, but you can go further together. And it sounds like building that community has, it's creating an environment where everyone can go further together.
Exactly. And to create a different way, that it's not like, only, like you said, it's not like that there's only spot for one person at the top of whatever mountain you're climbing, that we can all reach our peaks together, and it will be a successful experience, and the journey will be a lot more pleasant.
Yeah, that's really great. Okay, so I'd love to end this conversation by asking, how can listeners or viewers who want to get in touch with you to help support your work or just to learn more from you, how might they be able to connect with you?
I'm on LinkedIn, and I'm at the University of my life, and my contact information is quite public, actually, because I'm at the university, and so I think I'm pretty good about responding, and if folks need advice, to just reach me by email.
Okay. Thank you so much, and we hope that you enjoyed this conversation. Please like and subscribe, and we'll see you in the next one.
Thank you. Appreciate the opportunity.